Welcome to the deep dive. We know you're always looking for that next shortcut to being truly well-informed, and today we have an incredible journey mapped out for you.
We really do.
Yeah, the stack of sources on the desk today is, honestly, it's one of the most eclectic mixes we have ever analyzed on the show.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we are pulling from on-the-ground YouTube explorations of these remote, highly contested archaeological sites.
Plus some incredibly dense academic texts dissecting ancient epigraphy.
Right, and we're putting all that right alongside historical legal treaties that literally drew the lines of the modern map.
It's a phenomenal cross-section of human behavior, really.
It is. At first glance, you might wonder what a territorial treaty from the 1800s has to do with, say, a piece of baked clay from antiquity.
Right, it sounds totally disconnected.
But there is this profound thread connecting all of these documents and locations.
And that through line is exactly what we are unpacking today. The mission for this deep dive is to explore one massive, enduring question.
Which is, how have human beings throughout history staked their claim on the world?
Exactly. We're examining the mechanics of proving your existence, maintaining a distinct cultural identity, and establishing legal jurisdiction.
Because humanity has approached this in some incredibly diverse ways over the millennia.
Whether that meant pressing reeds into wet mud,
or carving declarations into 80-ton boulders,
or even arguing the finer points of sovereignty in front of the United States Supreme Court.
The technological methods certainly evolve over time, but that underlying psychological and legal need to plant a flag and say, you know, I am here and this space operates under my rules, that remains entirely consistent.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand a massive, highly polarized historical controversy hiding out in the deserts of New Mexico, we first have to travel back thousands of years.
Right back to the Middle East.
Right. Let's look at the absolute foundation of record keeping. The Sumerian clay tablets.
Ah, yes. The classics.
The texts in our stack detail these artifacts from Mesopotamia, and they date back over 5,000 years. The creators would take wet clay, inscribe it with a wedge-shaped cuneiform script, and then just leave it to bake hard in that blistering Mesopotamian sun.
And what is crucial to understand about these tablets is their utility. They weren't just reserved for capturing, sweeping epic mythology like Gilgamesh or big royal decrees.
They were practical.
Exactly. These pieces of baked earth were highly functional, everyday tools.
They essentially functioned as an immutable ledger, like an ancient blockchain of sorts.
That's actually a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, they were recording mundane trade transactions, everyday civil laws, and binding legal codes. By firing that clay, it was the first time humanity could put a physical stake in the ground regarding an agreement.
Ensuring the terms would survive long after the people who made it were gone.
Exactly. It basically laid the groundwork for all modern culture and jurisprudence.
Which naturally leads us to the next evolutionary leap in how civilizations recorded their existence and asserted their boundaries.
Moving from localized clay tablets to monumental stone.
Right.
This brings us to a massive archaeological aha moment from the sources. The Tel Dan Stele.
A huge discovery.
Yeah, the fragments of this monument were unearthed in northern Israel during excavations back in 1993 and 1994. We are looking at a massive slab of basalt dating all the way back to the 9th century BCE.
Roughly around 841 BCE.
Right.
And before we get into the text itself, the context here is vital. Before this fragmented basalt monument was pulled out of the dirt, the prevailing Babylonian academic narrative heading into the 1990s had essentially relegated the biblical King David to the realm of pure mythology.
He was viewed as a King Arthur-type figure.
Exactly. He was largely seen as a useful literary device, a legendary figure constructed by later generations to legitimize a dynasty, rather than a historical monarch who actually ruled a kingdom.
But then an archaeology team brushes the dirt off this triumphal monument.
Right.
And is erected by an Aramean king, historically identified as Hazael of Damascus.
And the entire inscription is basically a very public boast about his sweeping military victories.
Yeah, he's bragging in Old Aramaic about killing a king of Israel.
But the so what? Here, the true shockwave for the academic community lies in line 9 of that old Aramaic text.
Line 9?
Yes. Hazael specifically mentions defeating the king of the house of David. The exact phrase carved into the stone is Baitutulu.
Wow. And you don't carve an expensive, labor-intensive basalt monument to brag about defeating a phantom.
Precisely. That is the empirical weight of this discovery. Why would a foreign king, operating just a century or so later, claim a hard-fought military victory over the dynasty of a man who never existed?
It makes no sense.
It doesn't. This single piece of fragmented stone completely shattered that prevailing myth narrative. It provided empirical, carved-in-stone proof of a recognized geopolitical and military jurisdiction.
The House of David wasn't just a campfire story.
Not at all. It was a formidable, real-world entity that its enemies recognized, fought, and respected enough to publicly document their victories over.
So, establishing your jurisdiction and proving your existence is a fairly straightforward protocol when you have a ruling monarch, a standing army, and a giant slab of basalt.
Sure.
But that forces a pivot in our understanding here. What happens when you lose the war? What happens when your people are conquered, uprooted from their territory, and completely exiled?
That scenario becomes the ultimate stress test for any jurisdiction. It really forces the question, does your identity and legal framework only exist on the physical dirt you control, or is it something you can carry with you?
Into the diaspora.
Exactly.
And we get an incredible look at the mechanics of that survival through the Al-Yahudu tablets.
Yes.
Jumping ahead to the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, archaeologists unearthed an archive of about 200 clay cuneiform tablets in modern-day Iraq. And the Akkadian name, Al-Yahudu, translates directly to the city of Judah.
What's fascinating here is the psychology and the legal reality of these documents. They chronicle the lives of Judeans who had been forcibly exiled.
By Nebuchadnezzar II.
Right. And to grasp the significance of this, we have to look at how exile actually functioned back then. The operational goal wasn't just relocation, it was absorption.
You're supposed to just blend in.
Exactly. You were conquered, moved into the heart of Babylon, and the expectation was that your culture would completely dissolve into the dominant Babylonian static.
But the translation of the Al-Yahudu tablets proves these exiles actively resisted that dissolution.
They absolutely did.
These aren't just diaries. They are rigorous administrative, economic, and legal records. We're talking about tax disbursements, marriage contracts, and complex promissory notes.
They weren't just surviving, they were utilizing the conqueror's own economic tools to ring-fence their identity.
Right.
The Judeans maintained their distinct cultural markers, specifically their Yahwistic names, like Netanyahu and Yahukin.
It is huge.
It is, but beyond just preserving their names, they successfully operated a recognized functional legal architecture while completely embedded inside a hostile system.
They were conducting trade, asserting their economic agency, enforcing their own civil contracts.
It's a historical blueprint for operating an internal jurisdiction. You might be physically surrounded by the empire, but you run your own internal legal software.
It proves that a displaced people can maintain their heritage and their legal covenants without needing to hold the military high ground.
Or control the capital city.
Okay, so we see how the Judeans maintain their invisible jurisdiction in Babylon. But what does that actually look like if you try to build it physically in the diaspora?
That's the big question.
And to answer that, here's where it gets really interesting. We have to fast forward and look at a deeply controversial site in modern-day America.
Hidden Mountain in Las Lunas, New Mexico.
Exactly. Now, to be completely transparent with you listening, the texts and videos we are analyzing contain fierce, highly polarized academic debate about this site.
Very fierce.
And we're going to impartially map out those claims right now without taking a side. We're simply looking at what the evidence presents from both camps.
Which is the best way to approach it?
So, based on the on-the-ground topographical explorations from the sources, the focal point of Las Lunas is an 80-ton basalt boulder known as the Decalogue Stone.
Right.
Carved deeply into the rock face is an abridged version of the Ten Commandments, written in the form of Paleo-Hebrew, and it prominently features the name Yahweh.
And the surrounding environment suggests this isn't just an isolated rock dumped in the desert. The topography implies a deliberately structured outpost.
Right, there's a highly defensible ridge.
Yeah, and at the natural entrance to the trail leading up the mountain, there is a carved rock that functions structurally like an ancient mezuzah.
And the mezuzah wasn't just a religious symbol in antiquity.
No, it was a physical, legal boundary marker placed at the gateway of a sovereign property to declare the laws governing that space.
And as you move further up the mountain past that defensible entrance, there is a distinct outer perimeter constructed of stones. The layout suggests living quarters designed to hold livestock safely, surrounding a central raised mound.
A mound that resembles a tabernacle or a dedicated place of worship.
Exactly. There is also a distinct green water passageway cutting through the landscape, implying that ships might have once been able to dock relatively close to the site.
And at the very peak of the mountain.
The smashed Mazaron.
Right. A Hebrew star chart or zodiac that appears to have been deliberately destroyed.
The physical layout really paints a picture of a complex outpost. But the academic establishment is entirely divided on whether this is an authentic ancient settlement or an elaborate modern hoax.
Let's lay out the analytical case for its antiquity first.
Right, because you can't exactly haul an 80-ton boulder into a university laboratory for carbon dating.
No, you can't. So researchers have had to rely on other methods. In 1985, a professional geologist named George E. Morehouse conducted a rigorous weathering analysis of the site.
He compared the patina and the erosion of the Paleo-Hebrew inscription to some nearby vandalism that was clearly dated from 1930.
Exactly. And based on the differential in how the rock had aged and repatinated, Morehouse concluded the Decalogue stone was significantly older.
He estimated the carving was executed anywhere between 500 and 2,000 years ago.
There is also targeted linguistic support from archaeolinguist Cyrus Gordon. He theorized that the stone is an ancient Samaritan mezuzah.
Because ancient Samaritans were known to carve abridged versions of the Ten Commandments onto massive stone slabs at their gateways.
Right. And Gordon pointed out that the Los Lunas inscription features very specific letter forms, like a distinctively flat-bottomed shin.
Which aligns perfectly with ancient Samaritan epigraphy.
Yes.
But countering that, we have the fierce opposition from mainstream skeptics, starting with the deeply problematic origin story of the stone's discovery.
This is a major sticking point.
The site was first officially recorded in the academic record in 1933 by an archaeologist named Frank Hibben.
From the University of New Mexico.
Right. Hibben claimed an unnamed guise led him to the mountain, stating the rock had been known to locals since the 1880s. But the immediate hurdle for historians is that Hibben had a documented history of fabricating archaeological data to support his own theories.
Which casts a massive shadow over the initial reporting.
It really does. Furthermore, epigraphers who specialize in ancient inscriptions argue that the text itself is fundamentally flawed. They point to spelling and syntax anomalies, elementary orthographic errors.
They also note the blending of Greek and Samaritan letter forms in the exact same text.
And the use of modern punctuation, marks that simply did not exist in ancient Hebrew script.
Right.
And then archaeologist Kenneth Fetter points out perhaps the most glaring physical absence.
Yeah.
A total lack of what he terms cultural detritus.
The trash.
Yeah, the trash. If a functioning ancient Hebrew or Samaritan civilization actually lived and traded in New Mexico, they should have left a massive footprint. Sprawling trails of ancient pottery shards, broken tools, fire pits.
Settlement foundations.
Exactly. And absolutely none of that has ever been recovered around Hidden Mountain.
So the debate remains completely deadlocked. You have compelling geological weathering data and highly specific linguistic markers on one side.
Heavily contrasted by suspicious discovery origins, textual anomalies, and a total absence of physical trash on the other.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, if we view the site through the lens of what we just discussed regarding ancient jurisdiction,
Right.
if the Los Lunas site is authentic, the layout perfectly aligns with those ancient protocols for establishing a foothold. It acts as a perfect synthesis of the earlier mechanisms.
The Tel Dan protocols.
Exactly. Think back to the Tel Dan Stele. The ancient protocol for establishing an immutable jurisdiction wasn't drawing an arbitrary line on a piece of parchment. It was carving your law into basalt.
Making it a legal fact in stone.
Yes. The Los Lunas basalt stone, functioning as a massive mezuzah at the gateway of a defensible ridge, operates on the exact same legal wavelength. It is a physical stake in the ground declaring a specific governing law over a specific territory.
And the argument regarding the lack of sprawling cities and cultural detritus, that might not be the disqualifier it appears to be.
Not if we apply the Al-Yahudu exile mechanism. Mainstream archaeology often relies on finding massive urban footprints.
Right.
But the exiled Judeans in Babylon prove that a displaced people can operate a quiet, highly structured internal legal architecture while completely surrounded by a dominant culture.
A defensible ridge featuring a Git mezuzah and a core legal decree. That is exactly how a sovereign remnant might engineer a survival outpost in the diaspora.
Leaving a minimal footprint by design.
That brings us to the smashed Mazaron at the peak of Hidden Mountain. To understand why someone would expend a significant physical effort to hike all the way up a mountain solely to deface a star chart, we have to pull from another incredible source document.
The MUL-APM.
Yes, the Comprehensive Babylonian Astronomical Compendium. While surviving clay copies date to the 7th century BCE, the knowledge and texts were compiled around 1000 BCE.
It is a staggering piece of ancient scientific observation.
It tracks 71 different stars and constellations. It operates on a rigorous 360-day schematic year.
And it maps out the sky by dividing it into 3 distinct atmospheric bands, named after their deities.
The paths of Enlil in the north, Anu at the equator, and Ea in the south.
And what's vital here is that these ancient astronomers weren't just stargazing for agricultural curiosity. They were correlating celestial movements with hard, verifiable physical events on Earth.
They were predicting 132-mile-per-hour winds, severe storm systems, shifting weather patterns.
And crucially, they explicitly tied these atmospheric movements to sovereign authority. They believed in atmospheric jurisdiction.
For instance, the alignment of the Pleiades star cluster with the moon was directly interpreted as a mandate for kingship.
Right. So ancient sovereignty wasn't just about the dirt you stood on. It was literally tied to atmospheric mapping.
Which cast the destroyed Mazzaroth at Las Lunas in a completely different light. If this site was an active outpost, smashing that zodiac wasn't just random teenagers committing vandalism.
No, it was a deliberate, tactical, legal strike.
It was an attempt to completely erase a rival's atmospheric jurisdiction.
You destroy the celestial monument to invalidate their legal claim to both the heavens and the earth below it. It is an act of jurisdictional warfare.
So what does this all mean for us today? We have been analyzing basalt steels, clay ledgers, smashed star charts. How do these ancient concepts of establishing physical stakes translate into modern legal doctrines?
The translation is remarkably direct. Let's look at a foundational piece of international law decided by the United States Supreme Court in 1812.
The case of Schooner Exchange v. McFadden.
Exactly. This legal battle involved a French warship that docked in Philadelphia, which 2 American citizens claimed was unlawfully theirs.
But Chief Justice John Marshall delivered a ruling stating that national ships of war entering the port of a friendly power are totally exempt from the local jurisdiction of that power.
It legally codified the doctrine of foreign sovereign immunity. Marshall's logic dictated that a sovereign entity's property acts as a floating jurisdiction.
The surrounding municipal laws of Philadelphia did not apply to the deck of that French ship.
Right. And if we apply that concept to our historical timeline, an asset established under a recognized sovereign jurisdiction, whether that is a French warship, a carved Aramean stele, or a legal mezuzah outpost, cannot be legally compromised or overwritten by the surrounding static.
The dignity of the sovereign remains intact regardless of the geography.
Yes.
And we see that legal continuity play out physically with massive land transitions as well.
We do.
The historical texts in our stack point us to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo from 1848, which ended the Mexican-American War.
And the subsequent Gadsden Purchase in 1853.
Right. Together, these treaties transferred more than half of Mexico's territory over to the United States, drawing the modern borders of areas like New Mexico and Arizona.
But the United States government couldn't just wipe the slate clean and start from zero. Articles 8 and IX of the 1848 treaty explicitly guaranteed that the pre-existing property rights and civil rights of Mexican citizens living in those newly ceded territories had to be inviolably respected.
The treaty forced the newer annexing power to honor the older established jurisdictions.
Exactly. Transitioning the overarching authority does not erase the established property lines on the ground.
The U.S. entered those lands under a strict, binding contractual obligation to uphold the law of the prior sovereign.
It proves that older covenants and land rights hold immense, undeniable legal weight. Just as a stone carved in the 9th century BCE validated the geopolitical reality of dynasty, an 1848 treaty validates the inviolable borders of modern property.
The continuity of jurisdiction is essentially the glue that holds civilization together.
It is.
It is genuinely wild to pull back and look at the whole picture. I mean, we started with Sumerians baking their everyday civil laws into wet clay to create an immutable ledger.
Right.
To ancient kings proving their victories weren't myths by carving them into the Tel Dan Stele.
To the exiled Judeans utilizing Babylonian economics to survive the static with their own internal laws.
And then navigating the fierce modern academic debate over an anomalous 80-ton boulder sitting on a defensible ridge in New Mexico.
And it all culminates in Supreme Court rulings on floating jurisdictions and 19th century property treaties.
Humans have always, relentlessly, needed to codify their existence and their legal right to occupy a space.
And this is precisely why viewing history through this multi-layered lens is so rewarding for you listening. It allows you to see the hidden architecture of the world you live in.
Absolutely.
When you look at a modern property deed or a municipal zoning law today, you can recognize that it shares the exact same legal DNA as an ancient king carving his name into basalt, or displaced people pressing their Yahwistic names into clay.
It's the exact same human endeavor, just translated across different technologies and millennia.
It fundamentally changes how you view the infrastructure around you.
It really does.
And this raises an important question, something for you to mull over long after we wrap up today.
Okay.
The historical breakdown of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo noted a very specific, intense detail. The treaty gave the Mexican residents living in those newly ceded territories exactly 1 year to make a choice.
A 1-year countdown.
Right. They could choose to retain their Mexican citizenship, or they could become U.S. citizens. Just a 1-year countdown to make a choice that alters the trajectory of your family's future forever.
That is heavy.
Imagine the immense psychological weight of that countdown. You wake up every single day, standing on the exact same dirt you have always lived on. Your house hasn't moved an inch.
Right.
Your farm is exactly where it was. The weather and the sky above you are identical. Yet, the unseen jurisdiction swirling beneath your feet is fundamentally shifting from one massive empire to another.
Wow.
It forces you to ask yourself, does your identity and your true sovereignty come from the physical land you stand on?
Or does it come from the unseen legal system swirling around you?
Exactly.
There's a profound place to leave it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the unseen architecture of the world around you, and we will catch you next time.